Okay, now we can consider the definition of aggregate demand, so the overall demand of the goods and services produced in our economic system. And this aggregate demand can be defined using the letter, the capital letter Z, which is defined as, so this the aggregate demand is given by the following definition, which is consumption, which we denote by using the letter C, plus the government expenditure, which we denote by the capital letter G, plus the investment, which we denote by the letter I, plus exports, which we denote by the letter X, minus imports, denoted by the letter IM. Okay, so this is the definition of aggregate demand. We can compute again we can represent this by Z equal C plus I plus G, so consumption, investment, government expenditure, exports minus imports. So this is the definition of aggregate demand. And in equilibrium, we have that we produce in our economic system an equilibrium value of the output if the output or income, which we can denote by Y, is exactly equal to the aggregate demand Z. So if this condition is satisfied, um, this means that we produce an equilibrium output, because the income produces an aggregate demand exactly equal to the level of income. So the equilibrium condition can be written as also GDP, gross domestic product, but we refer here to real GDP in this course. Before we introduce the price variability, we consider real GDP, so expressed using prices of a given basis here. So the real GDP in equilibrium must be equal to the aggregate demand Z. So if we have the level of consumption, the level of government expenditure, the level of investment, export and imports, we can derive the value of the equilibrium output. So in order to better understand this equilibrium condition, so Y equals Z, or real GDP equal Z, which means real GDP equal to aggregate demand, we can show an example. Using this table, we have the level of consumption, gross investments, government expenditure, and export and imports for the year 2013 and 2014. We can compute the level of the equilibrium GDP or equilibrium in output that we can get in 2013 and 2014 using these gross domestic, these components of aggregate demand. So we can try to compute the aggregate demand in so Z in 2013 is equal or is defined as the level of consumption is 2500, the level of investment is 405, the level of government expenditure is 600, the level of export is 280, minus the level of imports is 320. So using this computation, we have the level of the aggregate demand in 2013. So the level of the aggregate demand is 3465, and the real GDP, the equilibrium value of the real GDP in 2013 will be equal to the aggregate demand in equilibrium. So the aggregate demand is 3465. Okay. The same you can try by yourself to compute also the aggregate demand and the equilibrium value of the gross domestic product, the real gross domestic product in 2014. Okay, so in this case, the aggregate demand in 2014 will be equal to the level of consumption, which is 2540 plus the gross. Sorry, this is the consumption. Investment is 500. Government expenditure is 650. Exports are equal to 310 minus imports, which are equal to 490, and you get an aggregate demand in 2014 which is equal to 3510. So the real GDP in equilibrium in 2013 will be 2014, sorry, will be equal to 3510. So the real GDP is greater than the real GDP in the previous year, and when this the real GDP, so we can compute also the growth rate in real GDP using so the percentage change. The growth rate we can denote by G in 2014 is defined as the real GDP in 2014 minus the real GDP in 2013 divided by the initial value, which is the real GDP in 2013. Okay, so in this case you get the growth rate in 2014 with the real GDP growth rate. Normally when we talk about when we refer to growth rate or growth, we refer to the real GDP growth rate will be equal to the real GDP in 2014, which is 3510, minus the real GDP in 2013, which is 3465, divided by the real GDP, the initial value, so in 2013 is 3465, and you get 0.013, okay, an approximated value, which is around 1.3% of real GDP growth rate. Okay, in our example, so in this example, the level of consumption, the level of gross investment, the level of government expenditure, export, and imports is given, but we need to make some assumption about the consumption, investment, and other aggregate demand components. In particular, we can assume that consumption C is can be expressed as a function of the disposable income. Income and gross domestic product are similar topic because everything is produced can be distributed as income, as salary, interest rate, dividend, and so on and so forth for the production factors that households uh, supply to firms. But the consumption can be expressed as C0 plus C1, which multiply YD. YD is disposable income, and the disposable income is defined as the income minus the level of taxation, level of taxes. But the income is the same of the gross domestic product. So our assumption is that the level of consumption is not fixed as in this example. So consumption equal to this value or this value, but so it's not exogenous in some sense, but is depends on the level of income. So in order to identify um, to explain this theoretical hypothesis, we can say that a part of consumption can be explained by the disposable income, and this depends on a parameter C1, which is a percentage, so is a number between 0 and 1, okay, maybe 0.8, which means 80%, and if we will explain by an example what is the propensity to consume. So C1 is called propensity to consume, and C0 is the part of consumption which does not depend on current disposable income YD, but depends on future expectation or the level of minimum consumption for independently from the income. So we can make an example. We suppose that consumption is equal to 400, which corresponds to C0 plus 0.8, which is the propensity to consume, which multiply YD, which is the disposable income. This means if the propensity to consume is equal to 0.8, this means that an increase in disposable income of 100 implies an increase in consumption equal to 80. A decrease in disposable income equal to 100 implies a decrease in consumption equal to 80. So the propensity to consume represents the the part of consumption which can be explained by disposable income. So in this example, we can suppose that level of taxation is equal to 400. Okay, so the first question is what is the level of consumption if given this taxation, given this hypothesis on consumption, if the the gross income, so the income is equal to 2000. But this is easy to compute the level of consumption. The level of consumption, according to this theoretical hypothesis, will be equal to 400. So this number here, which is the part of consumption which does not depend on the current disposable income, plus the propensity to consume 0.8, which multiply the disposable income. But disposable income in this case is the gross income, which is 2000, minus the level of taxation, which is 400. So by by this computation we can compute the level of consumption, which will be equal to 400 plus 0.8, which multiply 2000 minus 400 is, which multiplies 1600. So the final result is the level of consumption equal to 1680. So this is the level of consumption if the level of income is equal to 2000, the level of taxation is of taxes is equal to 400. Okay, now we can try to solve another exercise. So in this case, what is the change in consumption if the level of income increases to a level equal to 2400? In this case, the level of consumption, if we want to compute the increase in consumption, we can use the propensity to consume, because in this case, given a level of taxes which has not changed because is still equal to the previous level, which was 400, in this case the level of disposable income increases by 400, so we can have an increase in consumption. We can denote by delta C, which will be equal to the propensity to consume 0.8, which multiplies the increase in disposable income, which is equal to 400. So in this case we should have, according to our theoretical hypothesis on consumption, an increase in consumption equal to 320. If we are not sure, we can check this by computing level of consumption related to an income equal to 2400, which is equal to the level C0, so which is 400, plus the propensity to consume, which multiply the disposable income, which is equal to the gross income, which now is 2400, minus the level of taxes, which is 400. But solving this, we get 2000, which is exactly respect to the previous level of consumption was 1680. The difference, this corresponds to an income equal to 2000. This corresponds to an income equal to 2400. The difference is equal to 320, which is the increase in consumption. But you can easily compute this change using the propensity to consume. Another interesting question that we stop is what should be the level of consumption if the disposable income is equal to 0. But in this case, using our theoretical hypothesis that consumption is equal to 400 plus 0.8, which is the propensity to consume, which multiply the disposable income, if this is equal to 0, this means that this part of consumption, so the part explained by the disposable income, is equal to 0, and the consumption is equal to 400 plus 0.8, which multiplies 0, which is equal to 400. So in this case, consumption will be not 0 if the disposable income is 0, but will be equal to 400. And how it's possible to consume 400 if your disposable income is 0? This is possible because you can use your financial wealth, or you can earn in order to consume. So it's possible to consume also if your disposable income is equal to 0. But this because you have a part of your consumption this part that you can call C0, which depends on your expectation of about your future income, or are connected with the a minimum level of consumption which is independent from the level of income.